Hi guys, I'm Nat from the Nat Coombs Show on ESPN. Gotta love that title. And you're listening to the Cleats Off podcast. Love that title too, with the brilliant Liz Bhandari.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Cleats Off podcast. I'm your host Liz Bhandari and this is a show that brings you closer to the game you love. Today's guest is sports presenter Nat Coombs from the Nat Coombs Show on ESPN. Nat is a man that we've been familiar with on our screens for several years when it comes to coverage of American football. Not only is he a TV presenter, but he regularly writes an NFL column for the Times too. Nat and I discuss how he got to where he is today and some of the memories he's made along the way. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the show, Nat. How are you?
Good to be back, Liz. Yeah, very well. This is one of those things, right, that I love about this business because, so full disclaimer to all your listeners, we've been chatting for about 15 minutes before we started recording. So I could say, how you doing? And like I haven't asked you that and heard all about it before. But for the benefit of everyone at home, how you doing, Liz?
I am really well, thank you.
Yeah, good to hear. It's good to be back on the show. Good to be back here.
Absolute pleasure to have you on. Now, you and I, we've been fortunate to speak, a couple of times, but we've never really delved into much about you, your passion for the game. So let's take it back to the beginning. Now, I know you've followed the game since you're a child and that you're a fan of the Dolphins, but how did all that start? Like, what got you into the NFL in the first place and why the Dolphins?
Yeah, that's a question I ask myself regularly. Hey, things are looking up though. So, how did I get into the game? Just purely by chance, actually. So, I chat to lots of people who had a relative or a friend that brought something back from the States, or their parents took them on holiday to Florida, or lots of different routes in. I was none of those. I was turning on the TV on Channel 4 as a kid one day as a sports mad kid and just saw this incredible Technicolor cartoon-like thing that I immediately fell in love with. I had no real idea what was going on, although you can pick up the basics pretty quickly, I guess. You could have I knew rugby and love rugby, but that was it. I just stumbled across it. I think like so many of my generation did, and I was hooked straight away. And it was a different way of learning then. I chat a lot to Vern and Kay about it because we've worked together a lot and we're the same age and the same generation, and we just compare notes and first down newspaper. This was pre-internet, pre-podcast. So the highlight shows, first down newspaper, teletext. I used to have to find out if the Dolphins had won by looking at the box score in the Times on the Tuesday morning. That's how I'd found out the Dolphins had won. So, but assimilating all this, getting books, magazines. Anytime you kind of wandered into Smith's and there was an American football magazine, it was, I'm having that. All my pocket money's going on that. So all different ways of bringing it together. But just hooked straight away.
And you've been covering the game since 2007?
Yeah, that was my first year. Exactly right, on Channel 5. God, that feels like a long time ago.
Well, that's it. And over the years, you've presented so many amazing shows along the way. Like, how did you get into, presenting and things like in the first place? Like, how did you end up down this path?
Well, again, a question I often ask myself. By a lot of luck, I suppose. There's always a lot of luck, I think, in certain jobs, certain vocations. You need a lot of luck, but at the same time, it's also usually a lot of graft as well. So that's probably the simple answer. I didn't have a plan. I wasn't, as a kid. I guess I was always a performer. I acted a lot. I did a film when I was quite young with Judi Dench. I was thinking about that and looking into going into that, and wrote a lot as well. I loved it. Basically, the things I loved most when I was growing up were performing, writing, and sport. Those were, I forget, math, science, struggled with all of those. But I ended up coming out of uni and not really knowing what I wanted to do, but knowing that it was something to do with those things, with the things I love. So I didn't have this clear blueprint. I didn't have this game plan. And I envy people that do whatever they want to do with their life if they have a really clear idea. They want to be a vet, or they want to be a doctor, or they want to be a pilot. terrific, and I envy them. I didn't have that. So I kind of bounced around a little bit, just trying different things, including stand-up, which I kind of started, as all stand-ups do, the kind of ground up, doing open mic nights in pubs all around the country, doing 5 minutes, then 10 minutes. And I got, I guess I had a lucky break there because I was okay, I guess, as a new act. I had my moments. But one night in particular, I had a really I went down very well with the audience in there, and there happened to be an agent in the room. And so I got signed quite early on, which was an important break because it kind of got me into the broadcasting system, I guess, because once you've got an agent, then they can start to get things going a little bit. And without that, it is harder. And I'm not being self-deprecating. I think it was incredible. I had to do a good gig, but I was lucky that the agent was in the room that night. It wasn't like there was a huge amount of buzz about me comparatively to quite a few of the other acts out there. I mean, I graduated the same, crew and year as people like Greg Davis, Rod Gilbert, Simon Amstel, Marek Larwood, who does my show a lot. Yeah. I mean, these guys are brilliant comics, and I wasn't. I could handle myself on stage, and I was in the same conversation. I was doing the same gigs as them, but I could tell early on they were at a different level, and so that kind of got me into the business, and I started to kind of piece things together and thought, what, I really love sport, presenting. I was starting to get more opportunities to do that, and so I knuckled down and said, right, concentrated on this. And you know what, Liz, the first year of doing NFL on 5, because I had a live background, that really helped, but I really struggled with that. I basically was learning on the job. I'd never done live TV before. It was incredible baptism of fire, and it was, definitely some highs and lows in terms of what I was doing. But I knew within 30 seconds of doing it, this is what I want to do in my life. So all of those different things, I was writing a lot, stand up, doing comedy, sketch shows, all these different kinds of things. And the moment I was doing that, even though I was just starting out, really, I just knew it in my soul. This is what I want to do.
Especially with your personal passion for the game in the first place, that would have definitely helped as well. So no, I think that's really, really cool.
That was quite jammy because I didn't have a game plan. I had no idea where the NFL was going. I remember my agent at the time, who is a brilliant agent. She's been, she's still going as well, actually, but she's been an agent in the business for 40 years, I think. And represented some incredible people. And I remember her phoning me and saying, I was in Barcelona at the time, and she said, and she knew I'd said to her, look, I want to pivot away from stand-up and comedy, and I want to present. I want to be a sports presenter in particular. And so she said, well, you're going to have to start from the ground up. So I was doing all these, any gig I could get, basically, and any piece of work I could get. You don't just go straight into presenting. It was, and then she phoned me and said, what do you know about? I think you told me this. What do you know about American football? I was like, are you kidding me? What? That gig's up? Talk about lucky. That was, one of my loves and came up. But at the same time, I had 2007 was, of course, the first year of the international series, right?
Yeah.
So who the hell knew that NFL was going to get this big in this country? I certainly did. So that was very fortuitous as well.
Yeah, definitely. How much would you say you've seen, I guess, interest in American football grow beyond the traditional fan base since you started covering the game? And how much do you think that the international series kind of is responsible for that?
Yeah, great question. I think it is really significant because I think it's one of the significant factors. I think access to content and, is a key part of it. To my point earlier on, while that has a charm about it, and I'm glad that I kind of went through that experience, there's no substitute for the access to so much that we have now. Highlights within minutes, seconds, really, of scores happening, the archive of material that's out there, all the great podcasts. So much is out there, right? So that's a big part of it. But I think you're right. I think the international series, the fact that it was the A game up close and personal, I think that was the big difference. Like my generation remember as kids, teams coming over for the American Bowl and friendlies or exhibition games at Wembley, and they were amazing because we got to see some kind of football, but you wouldn't see any of the big stars. The game didn't matter. And NFL Europe was really important and such a key I think it's a real shame that NFL Europe has gone for the progression of the league, and the fact that people do develop at different times is Kurt Warner's the poster boy for that. But I mean, it is a pity, and coaches too. So it's a shame NFL Europe has gone. But similarly, it wasn't the A game, and when you're suddenly bringing over, superstars. The first year you had, obviously the Giants, so who went on to win it all, and you had, Eli, OCU Manura. I have to say that. All the big names, all the big stars. Jason Bell. Actually, J Bell didn't travel for that game. He was on the Giants that year, but I don't think he traveled. I think he was injured. But yeah, it was fundamentally different. So yeah, I think it was a big part of it.
And obviously, it's a big shame we're not going to get the games in London this year. But looking back at, I guess, we've had quite a good amount of really good matchups. Which one do you think has been your favourite, and why?
Gosh, I think the best game might have been the Washington-Cincy game. I think it might have been the most exciting. Last season, for personal reasons, the Texans-Jags game, because it was the first game my kids went to live.
Oh.
So that was really, really special, because they're sports mad now. I've got two boys, and they're at an age now where absolutely obsessed with all sports and the NFL increasingly so. But that was the first time they'd been there, so that was really special because I was there, and of course they were there as well. So they kind of made the whole day. I mean, I always really make sure that I remind myself how lucky I am and privileged I am to be anchoring those games. It's something I never take for granted. I should never take for granted. It won't last. Someone will replace me, as it should. There is always evolution there. So I know it's a finite thing, and it's difficult to do that sometimes, because even though I guess I've been doing this a while now, and so I'm much more settled than I was when I started out and experienced. So that creates, I guess, a certain sense of composure that maybe you don't have earlier on in your career. You still never take that for granted, and you're still adrenaline is flying, and it's a piece of work. I mean, I never compare it to a serious piece of work like neuroscience, but at the same time, you're concentrating on a lot. Like when I'm doing that, say a BBC game, you've got I take open talk back, which means I can hear the gallery talking all the time, and some presenters don't like that. They want what's called closed talkback, where you don't hear anything unless they're talking directly to you. But I have it open. Obviously, I'm listening to the guys. I'm watching what's going on. There's a huge amount of information that's flying around, so it's quite hard sometimes to detach yourself from that. But I always try and make sure I point in each broadcast where I'm like, look at where you are, look at what you're doing. Forget that kid who was reading First Down in the playground when everyone was going, what is that? And look where you are now. So in that respect, they were all really special. I suppose the one other thing I always particularly remember is interviewing Jim Kelly, because he was such a seminal part of football growing up. Always admired him as a player. Of course, as a Finns fan, he was at our big rivals at the time. Certainly, they were much more competitive than the Patriots for most of that era, and were the best in the division for a long time, right? So they were the team to beat, and Kelly was their guy. So you had these great Marino Kelly duels, different styles of quarterback. So I always really admired him, but in particular off the field as well, like what he has been through, how he has dealt with that. And cancer is something that affects a lot of us. And it's something that therefore resonates, I think, when you see somebody who you admire so much going through it and being so unbelievably brave in the process. So that was a real highlight of my career when he was over, when the Bills were over, and I got to interview him in the studio as well. So those are a few of them for sure. But I've got all the games are great. I love it.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're really lucky to have them in the first place. So yeah, no, right. I love it. And do you know what? When you mentioned the Texans game, I actually cried at that. I was so excited to be seeing JJ Watt because he wasn't there. Like literally, they're all coming out, and I just started crying. And my husband was like, "What's wrong with you?" I'm like, "Just said that JJ Watt's not here."
Oh no. Oh, my youngest actually got a JJ Watt shirt, but so I guess they are technically Texans fans. I mean, I would never, in the same way, I haven't forced West Ham on them, although they wanted to be West Ham fans. I said, you got the choice. They haven't really sort of adopted the Dolphins. They'll tell you if you ask them that they're Dolphins fans, but they haven't really. And for that game, I said, look, it's your first game. I'm going to buy you both the jerseys, so you can choose who you want. And my eldest went for Deshaun Watson. My youngest was really weighing it up between DeAndre Hopkins, which in retrospect now was probably a good move, and JJ Watt. He went for JJ Watt, and here's the kicker. At the end of the game, they were behind one of the end zones about, I guess, sort of 6-7 rows back. And at the end of the game, they went down, as the players and all the Texans were working that particular touchline, signing autographs. So they went down and met some of the players and got to the front because they're only little, so everyone was kind of letting them through. And they got to the front and were high-fiving as many players as they could. And the youngest high-fived DeAndre Hopkins, and Hopkins gave a really good high-five, but he also said, "Next time, get my shirt." So he's always remembered that. But I told him, look, it would, you'd had to have, put it in the wardrobe now, never worn it again. So you picked right.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. All right, guys, we'll be right back. First, we've got a quick message from our friends over at the National Vintage League.
Hi, this is Hugh, and you're listening to the National Vintage League ASMR. If you're looking for authentic vintage NFL jerseys and apparel from the 1970s till now, there's only one place to go. Come check us out at nationalvintageleague.com or check out our Instagram. Save the planet, look good doing it.
And don't forget, you can enjoy 10% off by using the code NFLGirlUK. Back to the interview. Now, obviously, it's still not really certain whether we're going to have a season kicking off in September. What do you suspect is going to happen?
Oh, Liz, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be a rich man, right? I mean, I was talking to Carlson last night about this, and he has put me in a really pessimistic mood about it because I was. He's skeptical that it will start on time, and I kind of agree with him actually, because things have clearly changed at the time of us recording this. Where are we now? The 14th of June we're recording this, so things have changed dramatically in America, even over the last few weeks. So I was reading that Pittsburgh, which was one of the cities that had got through this relatively unscathed, and even a few weeks ago it was one of the cities that said we've had no new cases on a certain day, has now really spiked again. So it is a sinister and horrible thing that we're dealing with. And whilst it's not entirely unprecedented in the sense that the world has dealt with these things before, it hasn't dealt with this particular type. So I think it's impossible to know, is it going to spike again with the cold weather, to what degree? So it's really hard to work out. I mean, I guess that the longer there is uncertainty, or the longer there is a heightened level of outbreak in a lot of America, so training camps just realistically can't start, then I think we're looking more likely at a delay than anything else. But at the same time, the NFL, the great things about the NFL is how condensed it is in many respects, that it can shift the entire season a few months and not really be too affected by it. I mean, baseball, and we're producing a new show with Johnny Gould and Josh Chetwin, the new baseball pod, and thank God we're able to do it, because there is, touchwood, going to be a season, but it's going to be so different, a 60-game season as opposed to 162 games. So I think the NFL can look at things and think, well, we can still retain a 17-week, 16-game season, playoff, Super Bowl in one go, even if we delay it a few months. So that's, I think, maybe more likely to happen at the moment.
Yeah, hopefully. I think, it'd be a real shame if we didn't have a season. And as well, if there was a season, I think it'd be a real shame if there wasn't fans in the stand. But how
do you feel about that? I mean, it's the it's a
Yeah.
huge issue for me. I mean, I'm glad that there is, there's sport on, there's football, the cricket, the test was on. It's great, but
Yeah.
it's not even close, is it?
It's
I
not
mean,
like when you're watching like the football here. Like for me, what I find weird. Well, so I've seen it two ways. You've seen it when there is no like crowd noise, and you can just hear the players shouting to each other, and it feels like you're just watching a local game. Like doesn't
yeah,
feel like the Premier League or anything like that. And then you hear it when they do put like the crowd noise in, and it's just weird because it's like delayed by a couple of seconds because they're hitting whatever
yeah,
button's relevant for that moment. So it's weird. You can't win either way, basically. But yeah, I just think it's a shame to not have like to not be able to watch the game, right in front of you type thing. But at the same time,
mm,
the way that the NFL does things. I mean, look at the draft. That was a fine
yeah,
example of here's what we can do. Like we
yeah,
can find
true.
a way to make it work. So I don't know. It's a tough one.
It's a great point actually. The draft, everyone was so, there's going to be all these
Yeah.
technological failures. It's going to be a disaster, and it was really, really gripping, wasn't it? And if
Yeah, I
anything,
loved it.
I loved it. It just had, we all loved just the window into different people's houses. That was
Yeah, oh
great.
my god.
The but that whether it was Kingsbury or Jerry Jones's boat was my personal favorite.
Yeah.
But the fact that it to the most part, or pretty much entirely, I think, just was just a softer lens on the NFL and the characters, like particularly coaches and GMs who
Yeah.
are often by their nature have to be quite quite hardcore and motivated, and it was
Yeah.
just a kind of gentler vibe, which I think was a good thing given the current climate.
Yeah,
So yeah,
definitely, yeah.
it's a great point you make. I mean, the NFL is one of the smartest organizations in any business, let alone in sport. So they'll find a way, I think. But it's just what it looks like. We don't know yet.
Yeah, that's it. We'll just have to, I guess, wait and see what happens, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, obviously, you've been a fan of the game for a long time. What would you say have been like the biggest changes that you've seen in how the game is played?
I guess the two main things are complement each other really. So more and more sophisticated defense, I think, and more ambitious and expansive offense. Really, borrowing more from not necessarily new things. I was reading. It's quite interesting. I'm reading. In fact, it's right here. A really good book called "Collision Low Crosses" by a guy called Nicholas Davidoff, and I got it ages ago, but hadn't sat down and read it. It's the beauty of having a bit of extra time because of lockdown is that you kind of get to stuff that maybe you didn't before, and it's all about the Jets 2011 season, and it's quite interesting because Mike Tannenbaum, who was at the Jets at the time, of course, in the front office, he's a regular on my ESPN show. So I'm going to definitely reel out some sections here because this guy follows them around. He has really, really good access, and is the Rex Ryan era Jets, right? I mentioned it because there's a great line in it where they were at the combine, and he didn't attribute these quotes to anyone specifically, so they were, anonymous, but things he heard in the bar on his first night in the combine. And one of them was, Josh McDaniels thinks he invented football, which was great. So, it's not that any of these ideas are necessarily entirely new, but they're, I guess, integrated into the NFL and the combination and the application. So you just look at what Andy Reid has done at the Chiefs, for example, and where Andy Reid gets his inspiration and influence from in terms of, drawing up the playbook and trying new things. So I think that it has become more innovative, I guess. That is how I'd explain the offense. Certainly more expansive, and consequently defenses have had to up their game as well. So it's always difficult when you look at sport and you say, well, it's more sophisticated. People say it's about footballs, as in European football. It's more it's a harder game than it was 30 years ago. It's might be more complex in certain ways. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a harder game. It's just a different game. I think it's patronizing to great players from the past and great coaches from the past where you suggest that it was all very, very base level. And it's the same with the NFL. It's not necessarily that teams, well, obviously 30 years ago we're talking about some of the great players then in this show, right? So but it is different, and those are probably for me the two main ways, I'd say.
That's it. I mean, the game, it's developed. That's it. You can't compare today's players to the past. It's an entirely different field.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you talked a little bit about some of the people you've spoken to that stood out to you. When it comes to, I guess, a bucket list, is there anyone
Mm.
that you would love to work alongside, or someone in particular that you would love to interview someday?
In football or just generally?
Yeah, why not? Let's go general.
Yeah, okay, so mix it up, do a bit of both. Okay, so I've never interviewed Marino, and a part of me thinks maybe I should keep it that way, because
Don't ruin the dream.
yeah, exactly.
Aw.
I could just keep him on this pedestal of brilliance, and but Marino would be great. I think I would have loved to interview Don Shula actually. So
Yeah.
from in terms of formative years, obviously two absolute heavyweights. Some of the interviews, Jalen Ramsey I interviewed last summer. He was great, like really, really interesting character, and I'm interested in those players who have just not necessarily strong opinions for the sake of having strong opinions. And I think Ramsey, by his very nature, when we talk quite a lot about the necessity for a corner to have a big personality. That was kind of the starting point. And it was a difficult one because you never quite know whether, and sometimes they don't, whether a player is going to go for this line of questioning, and it depends on the mood. But he was up for it. And he hadn't had to do too many media. He wasn't overtired, and I guess he was quite interested in talking about something outside of the typical, so those interviews are great. So on that basis, I think there are certain players that I think would be really, really interesting to talk to in that capacity, where you could talk to them away from, away from the X's and O's.
Yeah.
I'd love to have a real sit down with. I'm just thinking actually which coach I'd love to have a real sit down with Pete Carroll. I think Carroll is someone that is a fascinating character.
Yeah.
He just so much energy, and also talk to Belichick, but not about football. I'd like to do that too. We once interviewed Belichick in New England. Me and Carlson. Carlson did the interview because Carlson went to college with him.
Wow.
Yeah, he was at college with him, and we were at Foxborough and pre-season. So I'm trying to think what year it was, 2008 probably, and this was the same year, incidentally, that we went through, because we went to the Giants training camp as well, which was in Albany. And when we flew into New York, if memory serves me correctly, and we got through customs really, really quickly, because the guy goes, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Oh, London, England." And he goes, "What are you here for?" And I said, "Oh, I'm an NFL journalist or NFL broadcaster." And he goes, "Oh," and he looked at me like dead in the eyes, and he goes, "Oh, so you Manura?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "We love OC," and just wheeled us through. So basically, OC got us fast tracked through customs before I'd ever even met him, worked with him. So we got to Foxborough, and all the kind of jaded beat writers having to sit through, interminable press conferences pre-season where they weren't getting anything, and a beat writer needs a tidbit of information to roll with, right? And so I was kind of bright-eyed. This is like my second season. Said, "Yeah, I think we're going to get an interview with Coach Belichick," and they all actually spat their coffee out, like, "Yeah, sure you are, kid," And I said, "No, I think we are," and they clearly didn't believe me. And then the PR guys came in. He goes, "Guys, we're going to start the press conference in about 5 minutes. Coach Belichick just has a very quick interview he's going to be doing." And then just kind of called us through. It was amazing. So we went through. So that was great. But Carlson did the interview. And I'd love to ask Belichick, like, what TV does he watch? What's on Belichick's playlist? I'd love to get into that. Like, what music makes him tick? And so in football, I guess those guys. Outside of football, well, my big influences in life, or people I really love and admire, Springsteen. Huge Springsteen fan. So, but again, maybe that's a Marino thing. Maybe I interview him and it's not going to be what I had hoped. So, but Springsteen for sure. And then David Lynch is probably the other person I love to interview. A massive Lynch fan. I think he is an absolute genius, and I'd love to maybe not interview him, just hang out with him. I'm not sure how he'd feel about an interview, so I think just kind of hang out with Lynch and do something really innocuous and play Cluedo with David Lynch. That's what.
Can you imagine?
That's my answer. It'd be amazing.
Are you competitive? Because it could all go wrong.
It could all go horribly wrong. Exactly right. Yeah.
Now, talk to me about your shows, because obviously, you've done so many different shows over the years, and obviously now you've got your ESPN show. Tell me all about that, and obviously if you've got coming up.
Yeah, I've been lucky really with kind of bouncing around, where the rights have taken gone and taken me, and I'm still very lucky to be involved on the live side with Talk Sports coverage, of course, which I anchor, as does Will Gavin. We kind of share the duties there. And the BBC games, London games, but of course that won't be happening this year. But ESPN, that is I guess my main gig these days, which is a show that we were initially making as an indie. So we decided to make a pod, and we got a sponsor for it and rolled it out as an indie, which was great. And ESPN, who I knew really well, I worked for back in the day, to a different team these days, but I had a relationship with them, and I was doing kind of bits and bobs for them as and when. But they said, look, we really want to bring the show into the stable. So that was a no-brainer for me, because the guys there are great. Steve Saunders, Tom Kingham. It's a brilliant crew, and it's a really great venture because it's a co-production. So my company makes it with ESPN. It's a joint venture. Harry Holgate, who is for some of your listeners will remember the Americanage days, and Harry, the producer, and we go way back and collaborate on a lot. So Harry and Ollie Thornton, both brilliant producers, and they do all the heavy lifting. So we roll out a lot, and it's a real mix of the voices, faces from the UK that you guys know and love. So Carlson, of course, Jay Bell, Vernon. Nikki Bandini, Ben Isaacs, a longtime collaborator who's great on college in particular. So a brilliant cross section. And different guests as well, like Asmir Begovic, Darren Bent, like sports guys come on, comedians come on. Marika mentioned Tom Deacon. So it's a real cross section. And we get the benefit as well of being an ESPN show. We get access to and are fortunate enough to get a lot of the ESPN guys on. So Matthew Berry, Dan Orlovsky, Field Yates, Mina Kimes coming on soon, so that would be great. So real cross section, real mix, and I think it's a show, Liz, that the old school or the hardcore fan or the very literate fan gets a lot out of it because of all the contributors that I mentioned. They're just terrific, and they will give an informed and in many cases, I think, an original opinion on things. Yeah. At the same time, we're very much an accessible show, like a newsy show. We'll cover big subjects. We're not trying to out-duel other shows with how much we know, and let's really drill down into very complex X's and O's. There's not absolutely a place for that, but that's not the show we are. We're a 45-minute, 3 times a week. What do you need to know right now? What are the big stories? And going into the season, it will drop Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So Monday we'll be looking back. Wednesday we deep dive on certain issues, and Friday we look ahead to the weekend. So it's, I think, something for everyone.
And where do people go to find that show?
So that is available on all good podcatchers. So it's called the Nat Coombs Show, and I'd like to point out ESPN named that. Not me. That wasn't my choice. The Nat Coombs Show. Yeah. So iTunes, Spotify, ESPN's Pod Center, of course, as well. All of those places, and we're just kicking off. I think I alluded to it earlier, but a new baseball show with Johnny and Josh from the old Channel 5 days. That's called the Johnny and Josh Show. So we just launched that, which is exciting. And an NBA show as well called Anytime NBA. So we're starting to complete the set of American sports. Our college one's coming next. So we're building up. Yeah, but it's good times, good crew, and lots of fun.
Definitely. Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing it all. So I can't wait.
Oh, thanks, Liz.
Awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much for doing this today, and look forward to chatting to you later in the year.
Absolute pleasure. Always good to catch up with you. Congrats on everything you're doing as well. And yeah, let's check in when we've got football in around mid-November.
That's my fingers crossed.
Yeah. Take care.
Well, that's it for another episode of the Cleats Off podcast. As always, I'd love your comments and feedback, so feel free to reach out to me at NFLGillUK across Twitter, Facebook or Instagram. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. I wouldn't want you to miss a single episode. Until next time, thanks for listening.